States Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. We have an important hearing this afternoon, obviously, as we talk about the President-elect's nomination of Antony J. Blinken to be Secretary of State, and we'll get to that very quickly. Every time I'm sworn in for a new term, as a matter of personal privilege for just 2 minutes, every time I'm sworn in for a new term, I kind of think back. This is as I start my 41st year, I've learned some things over that period of time. I spent 28 years in our state senate, over 2 decades as leading it, and now 13 years here. And some things I've learned, I can make very briefly an observation. If we treat each other with kindness and respect, we get things done. One of the best friends I had during my time in the state senate was the Democrat leader. We're still close personal friends. My wife and I stay with him when we travel to North Idaho. He consults with me frequently and gives me advice even when I don't want it. And we have become and stayed very, very good friends over the years. We always got things done in Idaho. And I hope that as we go forward, that we will do likewise here. This not only is beginning of my 41st year in a Senate body, this will be my 53rd year of married to my wife. And after completing 36 elections, I consider that all quite an accomplishment. So with that, we're going to proceed to hear from Mr. Blinken after we make our opening statements. But Senator Durbin has very, very important matters that he must attend to, and we're honored to have him come and address this august body. And Senator Durbin, the floor is yours.
Chairman Risch, thank you very much. It's great to be back in the committee, which I served on many years ago. And Senator Menendez, thank you for your leadership and all of you who've gathered here today. I've been asked, and I'm honored that Mr. Blinken asked me to come before the committee and make an introduction. I'm not going to do what most do and reread his entire biography, which you've all seen and I'm sure are impressed with as I am. I just want to make a few points about the job he seeks and the moment he seeks it. On September 12, 2001, just hours after the 9/11 terrorist attack on the United States, the leading French newspaper, Le Monde, published a front-page headline of 4 words: "Nous sommes tous Américains." We are all Americans. With those 4 words, the people of France acknowledged the danger and pain in the United States and quite simply said, "We'll stand with you." Despite many differences on many issues, that's what friends are for. That is the reason that alliances count. With the end of the Trump administration, we face a stark choice. Does America first mean America alone? Does our nation still need friends and allies? Over the past 4 years, many of the strongest bonds between America and our allies have been strained, lifelong friends have been shunned, and authoritarian adversaries have been embraced. The role of the United States in the world, its values, its allies, its adversaries are in question. The world is waiting for a clear policy from our new president, and our new president has chosen one man to lead that effort, Tony Blinken. When you take a look at his background, it starts with the State Department. It includes service as staff director on this committee, with the National Security Council, working as Deputy Secretary of State. It's an amazing background. And there's also a moment, which I'm sure you all have seen and we've seen over and over again. There was that iconic photograph in the Situation Room when approximately 12 people were gathered with the President and Vice President of the United States and Secretary of State to see if finally we would capture Osama bin Laden. Tony Blinken was in that room. It tells you that he was more than just a peripheral staffer. He was an integral part of the security decisions of the United States of America. He's ready for this job, and we know it. There's one thing that we discussed before we walked in here that I think is a critical element, and that is the fact that he inherits a great department and many men and women who've dedicated their lives to the security of the United States of America. We need them. We see their expertise wherever we travel, in every corner of the world. Sometimes at great personal sacrifice, they are representing this country and literally risking their lives to do so. It is his job, and he understands it, to thank them for their efforts and to make sure that their morale is at the highest level so that America continues to be well represented around the world. It is my honor to introduce Tony Blinken today as the next Secretary of State. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. I know you have other things to do, so we will excuse you. And what we're going to do here today is I'm going to give some opening remarks. I'm then going to turn it over to Senator Menendez for his opening remarks. And after that, we will do a round of questioning. Each senator will be given 10 minutes. I will do it on a seniority basis, unlike our usual early bird process that we use. But because of the size of this, I think that it's important that we do it on a seniority basis. So with all that said, today's hearing is unquestionably significant. The Secretary of State is one of, if not the most important nominations that a president makes. He represents our interests abroad and is also looked to for defining America's role and posture in the world. Over the past several decades, we have watched nations with authoritarian ideologies and imperial tendencies increasingly attempt to grow their influence on the world stage. And unfortunately, that has happened with some success on their part. These countries challenge the very principles upon which the United States was founded: democracy and the rule of law. As the Biden administration begins tomorrow, there are several key foreign policy issues that need immediate attention. My most important concern, as Mr. Blinken and I talked about a few in my office not long ago, is Iran and the President-elect's promise to return to the JCPOA. President Obama thought the JCPOA would empower Iran moderates and see Iran abandon its nuclear weapons program. But this notion proved to be misplaced. The Iranian regime cannot separate itself from its revolutionary ideology. The JCPOA provided very beneficial sanctions relief for Iran, yet it failed to eliminate Iran's support for terrorist proxies, therefore allowing them to fund terrorism across the region. The deal also included very short-sighted sunsets on Iranian's conventional weapons and ballistic missile programs and allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium. Any new deal with Iran must address all the facets of Iranian bad behavior, including its ballistic missile program and ending support for terrorism. I fully understand and I fully comprehend that people want to focus on their nuclear ambitions, but these people have other bad activities that they're involved in that also need to be addressed. Unfortunately, the Iranian regime thinks it has successfully waited out the maximum pressure program that we've had in place. Only time will tell if they're right. At the time, President Obama used the extensive sanctions regime Congress created as a leverage to begin the JCPOA talks, and so he should have. President-elect Biden should take advantage of the significant leverage that has been provided through the maximum pressure program and negotiate a new deal that includes Iran's regional aggression. A policy of containment rather than appeasement is the only approach that will be successful. However, any discussions with Iran should begin and end with our allies in the region. Israel and many of our other Gulf allies felt the United States abandoned them and their security concerns during the JCPOA negotiations. With U.S. leadership over the last 4 years, our relations were rebuilt and paved the way for the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords signed last year were a significant step in fundamentally improving the security, economic, and diplomatic environment in the Middle East. But they also underscored the significant threat that Iran poses to our regional partners. I would hope future negotiations with Iran would include extensive consultations with not just Congress, but also Israel and our Gulf partners. And given its significant implications, any new deal should also be submitted as a treaty for Senate ratifications. I understand that that's a controversial issue, but if we're going to have the support of the United States, it can't just be one branch of government. It needs to be all branches of government. I hope that the Biden administration will adhere to these conditions before and during any engagement with Iran, and I sincerely appreciate, Mr. Blinken, your offer that prior to beginning or ending all of these negotiations, there will be significant consultation with this committee. I greatly appreciate that. Another area of serious concern with the new administration, obviously, is China, which I believe will be our greatest foreign policy challenge of this century. On a personal note, I want to thank you, Mr. Blinken, for having read the report, the 143-page report that I published just recently, and I also appreciate the kind words that you had for the conclusions and suggestions in that report. China is a strategic and global competitor of the United States, and the Chinese Communist Party routinely engages in economic coercion, military aggression, human rights abuses, and influence operations. Its policies deliberately damage U.S. interests and values. In the face of the Chinese Communist Party's dangerous goals, the United States must maintain a strong competitive stance. Rising to this challenge is now a sprint and a marathon that will require sustained political will, expanded cooperation with allies and partners, and properly aligned resources and personnel. Last year, I introduced the Strategic Act, the first comprehensive legislative proposal to compete with China effectively. This bill was written with Democratic senators' input and other Democrat organizations around this city who are in the think tank business, along with Republican think tanks. And it should be noted that China is not a partisan issue. It is an American issue. I know Senator Menendez has strong concerns in this regard also, and I hope we will work together as we move forward with those challenges. I hope and expect that the Biden administration will pursue bipartisan cooperation on challenges posed by the Chinese Communist Party. One of those challenges is Taiwan. The PRC's obliteration of Hong Kong's autonomy last year makes the question of Taiwan's future all the more urgent and serious. China's military modernization and expansion has dramatically shifted the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. This is eroding conventional deterrence, putting the U.S. military as well as Indo-Pacific allies and partners at risk. Taiwan is among the strategically consequential issues and should remain a key strategic priority. Finally, the COVID-19 pandemic has evolved into the largest, most destructive global health emergency in more than a century. More than 83 million people have been infected and 1.8 million people have died. Economies have been upended, schools and offices closed, and livelihoods destroyed. It will take years to recover from this global health catastrophe. There is a lot we still do not know about COVID-19, but two things are clear. Its global spread was accelerated by catastrophic failures at all levels of the existing global health security architecture. And unless we do something now, it will happen again. Last year, I introduced an effort to help the United States and our international partners get ahead of the next pandemic. I, along with my committee colleagues, pressed the WHO to launch an independent interim review of its response to the outbreak so we could figure out what worked, what didn't, and how to prepare for future outbreaks. The WHO ultimately followed our suggestion. If confirmed, I'm committed to working with you, Mr. Blinken, to advance reforms at the WHO that will help restore public confidence and enable it to more effectively respond to crisis in real time. I, along with Senator Murphy, Cardin, and Portman, also introduced bipartisan legislation to strengthen the ability of the United States and our international partners to detect, prevent, and respond to outbreaks before they become pandemics. I'm well aware that Senator Menendez also has a strong interest in this area, and I look forward to working with him and with the committee as we move legislation forward. This bill, the Global Health Security and Diplomacy Act, provides much-needed leadership and direction for U.S. global health security efforts overseas and incentivizes greater leadership and investment by others. I'm also eager to work with you, Mr. Blinken, if confirmed, to further redefine and enact this important legislation. Over the last 5 years, the world has seen dramatic change, and it is imperative policies are updated to reflect these new realities. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these important issues, and I thank you for being here today, and I thank you and your family for the willingness to take on the sacrifice to serve in this important position. With that, Senator Menendez, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first of all start off by saying I appreciate your efforts to work with me to get this hearing up today. to expedite the consideration of one of the most important national security positions in our government, the Secretary of State. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I think all of us have a very strong interest in seeing that the President has in place as rapidly as possible his national security team. Thank you for that.
I'll say amen to that, and I appreciate this, and also hopefully, if everything works out well, the expeditious consideration at a committee meeting to vote out the nominee. And let me just say one remark. I'll save my remarks about our future work together as a committee when the gavel changes, but as someone who has met your lovely wife, you are an incredibly fortunate man to have had over a half a century with her as a partner. So
no one knows better than I.
So congratulations to you on such a great long time together. She's just an incredibly charming person. Mr. Blinken, congratulations on your nomination. You're superbly qualified and prepared to be our next Secretary of State. And you have impressed us all over the years with your intellect, your dedication, and your humanity, including during your successful tenure as Deputy Secretary of State, Deputy National Security Advisor, and as Staff Director of this committee. Now, while tomorrow's inauguration is a time for healing and renewal, I am nonetheless compelled to speak about the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. The images from that day are permanently seared in our collective conscience. Terrorists defiling the Capitol with Confederate flags and Nazi images, seeking to take hostage or perhaps kill our democratically elected leaders, savagely beating police officers. And in that respect, my heart goes out to the family of New Jersey native and Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who succumbed to those injuries, and the family of Capitol Police Officer Howard Libengood, as well as dozens of other officers injured in the attack. This attack on the very foundation of our democracy delivered a tragic reminder that our ability to project power abroad is inextricably linked to the health and strength of our democracy. This does not mean that we cannot talk about the importance of democracy abroad, no, but rather we must show that senators and all other leaders in this country have a duty to stand up for democracy, for the Constitution, for the rule of law. There can be no exceptions. And I expect that from the Biden administration, and based on my experience, I know, Mr. Blinken, you will do so in word and deed. Now, if confirmed, your task will be to repair and restore America's place in the world. You'll face complex challenges all over the globe. The world's on fire. Rebuilding alliances, restoring American leadership at international institutions, tackling problems that define our times and defy borders like climate change, migration, and COVID-19. And you will need to recenter our foreign policy around the core American values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. But you will need to do so thoughtfully. Over the past year, the world has watched the United States completely falter on a national response to COVID-19, continue its overdue reckoning with systemic racism, and struggle with the President's obsession with thwarting the peaceful transfer of power, pushing disinformation, and attacking a free press. As we work to advance American interests around the globe and seek to create a more democratic, prosperous, and secure world, we have to redouble our efforts at home to secure a more perfect union for all Americans. Now, as you're likely aware, North Korea, Russia, Turkey require some immediate attention. Over the past 4 years, North Korea's nuclear and missile programs have continued to grow unchecked. In other words, the United States and our allies are more at risk now than after 4 years of President Trump than when he took office. A revanchist Russia continues to threaten the United States and our allies, including through the recent SolarWinds cyber attack, the spread of disinformation, and efforts to silence and murder political opposition. And Turkey continues to be destabilizing by supporting Azerbaijan's aggression in Nagorno-Karabakh and through its own aggressive behavior in the Eastern Mediterranean against our democratic allies, Greece and Cyprus. From a broader regional perspective, one of your most important challenges will be to forge a coherent strategy for the Indo-Pacific, one led by our values, centered on our allies and partners, and implemented with consistency. As you know, I believe that while the Trump administration got some of the questions about the region right, they came up with the wrong answers. At a time when we should have been strengthening our alliances, building new partnerships, empowering a multilateral architecture, expanding commercial ties, and ensuring the vitality of democracy and the rule of law, the Trump administration, in almost every case, did the exact opposite. And after 4 years of the Trump administration, we are in a worse position to effectively compete with China than before. So I'm interested in hearing more about what your top priorities will be if confirmed in approaching the Indo-Pacific region and how our China policy nests within this larger framework. We also have a number of ongoing challenges in the Middle East, perhaps none so pressing as Iran. As you know, I was not a proponent of the JCPOA, but I also believe the Trump administration's decision to withdraw without a serious strategy involving our allies would ultimately leave us less safe and Iran emboldened. Unfortunately, Iran's continuing aggression across the Middle East and its recent nuclear activity that has dramatically advanced its capabilities has vindicated that prediction. Now, I understand the Biden administration is interested in returning to a diplomatic path, which I support, but I fear returning to the JCPOA without concrete efforts to address Iran's other dangerous and destabilizing activity would be insufficient. I believe there's bipartisan support to find a comprehensive diplomatic approach with Iran that includes working closely with our European and regional partners if we take those other issues into consideration. Closer to home, political crises in Latin America have caused human rights and humanitarian disasters on an unprecedented scale. Simply put, addressing rampant crime, weak governance, corruption, climate-related displacement in the Northern Triangle must be a top priority for the country and deeply impacts the security and economic well-being of Americans. Further south, I'm encouraged by the Biden administration's plans to renew our commitment to the multilateral efforts we must lead in order to improve the effectiveness of international sanctions and humanitarian aid as we pursue a diplomatic solution to the Venezuelan crisis. Maduro's campaign of crimes against humanity and attacks against interim President Juan Guaido and democratic civil society, which I hope the administration will recognize interim President Guaido, all have serious implications for U.S. national security and regional stability. Mr. Blinken, I also hope you'll support Ambassador Bill Richardson's efforts to free the six Americans who have been unjustly detained in Venezuela. I'm confident that if confirmed, you'll do everything you can to repair and restore American leadership abroad. Foundational to that effort will be rebuilding and reinvigorating the State Department itself. As you well know, our career foreign and civil servants are incredibly talented and dedicated. Over the past few years, however, they have been treated with disdain, smeared, and forced out of public service. There has been a stunning loss of expertise, steep declines in morale, little accountability for those at the top, and the State Department still has not achieved a workforce that comes close to reflecting the diversity of our country. This state of affairs has impacted relationships across the globe, the Department's ability to engage in the interagency process and in its relationship with Congress. So the challenges you'll be facing are immense, but I have confidence in your experience and expertise. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and upon confirmation, I look forward to working with you to restore America's place in the world and to repair and rebuild our relationships and our institutions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Ms. Blinken, after our conversations earlier today and after hearing our opening statements, Senator Menendez input in that regard, as you can see, there isn't a whole lot of daylight between us on most of these issues. Certainly almost none whatsoever when it comes to objectives strategy and how to get there is obviously something that needs to be negotiated, and all of our best heads put together to try to get to that position. So we're interested in hearing that. Obviously, as Senator Menendez said, Iran is at the top of the list. China and Russia are right behind that. We have serious problems in Turkey. North Korea is on the list, and there's lots and lots of challenges. But we will do better if we all pull the wagon together, and I think we're headed in that direction right now. So with that, again, thank you for your willingness to serve, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And to you, to Ranking Member Menendez, to all the members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And I greatly appreciate everything you've done to make this hearing possible in this time. And I want to thank Senator Durbin in absentia for his very kind introduction. It is truly the honor of a lifetime to appear before this committee as President-elect Biden's nominee to be Secretary of State. And it's an honor that carries special significance for me for two reasons. First, as you've noted, I had the privilege of serving as the Democratic Staff Director of this committee for 6 years, working alongside a distinguished group of senators, including several still on the committee today, to advance American diplomacy and safeguard the interests of the American people. That experience gave me an abiding respect for this committee, for its finest bipartisan traditions, for the caliber of its members and staff, for the essential work it does to strengthen U.S. leadership around the world. If I have the honor of being confirmed, those lessons that I learned in my years with this committee will guide my approach to our work together. The second point of significance for me is a little bit more personal. In addition to my own confirmation as Deputy Secretary of State, this committee confirmed my wife, Evan Ryan, who is here with me today, as Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs. Confirmed my uncle, Alan Blinken, as Ambassador to Belgium, and confirmed my father, Donald Blinken, as Ambassador to Hungary. I hope I don't break the streak today. My family, especially my wife and our children, John and Lila, is my greatest blessing. Our tradition of public service is a source of tremendous pride. I view that tradition as something of a sacred duty, payment on the debt that our family owes to the nation that gave so many of my relatives refuge and extraordinary opportunities across the generations. My grandfather, Maurice Blinken, found refuge in America after fleeing Russian pogroms. My father's wife, Vera Blinken, found refuge in America after fleeing the communist regime in Hungary. And my late stepfather, Samuel Pizar, found refuge in America after enduring the horrors of the Holocaust. Sam was the only survivor among his immediate family and school of 900 children in Białystok, Poland, after 4 years in the concentration camps. At the end of the war, he made a break from a death march into the Bavarian woods, and from his hideout, he heard the rumbling sound of a tank. And as he looked out, instead of seeing the dreaded Iron Cross, he saw a 5-pointed white star. And so he ran to the tank and got to it. The hatch opened. An African-American GI looked down at him. He fell to his knees and said the only 3 words that he knew in the English language that his mother had taught him before the war: God bless America. The GI lifted him into the tank, into freedom, into America. That's who we are. That's what we represent to the world, however imperfectly, and what we can still be when we're at our best. If I have the honor of serving as Secretary of State, that is the vision that I will pursue, a vision articulated often by President-elect Biden, doubtlessly informed by his time on this committee, when he said that the United States is a nation that leads not only by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. If confirmed, 3 priorities would guide my time as Secretary of State. First, I will work with you to reinvigorate the Department of State, investing in its greatest asset, the Foreign Service officers, the civil servants, the locally employed staff who animate American diplomacy. I know from firsthand experience their passion, their energy, their courage, often far from home, away from loved ones, sometimes in dangerous conditions, exacerbated now by the pandemic. They deserve our full support. If I'm confirmed as Secretary, they will have it. I'm committed to advancing our security and prosperity by building a diplomatic corps that fully represents America in all its talent and in all its diversity. Recruiting, retaining, promoting officers with the skills to contend with 21st century challenges and who look like the country we represent. Sparing no effort to ensure their safety and well-being. Demanding accountability, starting with the Secretary of State, for building a more diverse, inclusive, and nonpartisan workforce. Second, working across government and with partners around the world, we will revitalize American diplomacy to deal with and take on the most pressing challenges of our time. We'll show up again, day in, day out, whenever and wherever Americans' prosperity and security is at stake. And we'll engage the world not as it was, but as it is, a world of rising nationalism, receding democracy, growing rivalry from China and Russia and other authoritarian states, mounting threats to a stable and open international system, and a technological revolution that is reshaping every aspect of our lives, especially in cyberspace. But for all that has changed, I believe some things remain constant. American leadership still matters. The reality is the world simply does not organize itself. When we're not engaged, when we're not leading, then one of two things is likely to happen. Either some other country tries to take our place, but not in a way that's likely to advance our interests and values, or, maybe just as bad, no one does, and then you have chaos. Either way, that does not serve the American people. I believe that humility and confidence should be the flip sides of America's leadership coin. Humility, because we have a great deal of work to do at home to enhance our standing abroad. And humility, because most of the world's problems are not about us in the first instance, even as they affect us. And no single country acting alone, even one as powerful as the United States, can fully and effectively address these problems. But we'll also act with confidence, with the confidence that America at its best still has a greater ability than any country on earth to mobilize others for the common good. Guided by these principles, I believe we can and we will overcome the COVID crisis, the greatest shared challenge since World War II. We can outcompete China and remind the world that a government of the people, for the people, can deliver for its people. We can take on the existential threat posed by climate change. We can revitalize our core alliances, force multipliers of our influence around the world. Together, we are far better positioned to counter threats from Russia, Iran, North Korea, and to stand up for democracy and human rights. And in everything we do around the world, I believe that we can and we must ensure that our foreign policy is actually working to deliver for American working families here at home. Let me conclude, if I may, Mr. Chairman, with a word about this institution, whose resilience and determination were on full display in the aftermath of the senseless and searing violence in these halls. Both the President-elect and I believe that we have to restore Congress's traditional role as a partner in our foreign policy making. In recent years, across administrations of both parties, Congress's voice in foreign policy has been diluted and diminished. That doesn't make the executive branch stronger. It makes our country weaker. President-elect Biden believes, and I share his conviction, that no foreign policy can be sustained without the informed consent of the American people. You are the representatives of the American people. You provide that advice and consent. We can only tackle the most urgent challenges we have if we work together, and I'm dedicated to doing just that. And so if I'm confirmed, my commitment is to work with each and every one of you on behalf of all Americans. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blinken. And of course, your words about working with us is music to our ears, and we'll be happy to be a partner with you in that regard.